What if I told you that the scariest moments of your life won't come from strangers in dark alleys, but from the people sitting right next to you at work? From friends who beg you to join them for a night out, or from that regular customer who always seems just a little too interested in your shift schedule? The truth is, the most dangerous situations we face aren't the ones we see coming. They're the ones that start with trust, with familiarity, with that quiet voice in our head that says something is wrong, but we ignore it because we don't want to seem rude or paranoid. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to share with you 3 real stories that will fundamentally change how you think about personal safety. These aren't random acts of violence from complete strangers. These are calculated manipulations that exploited one critical weakness we all share: our reluctance to trust our own instincts. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why your gut feelings are more sophisticated than any security system, and more importantly, you'll learn how to recognize the specific warning signs that could save your life. Because here's what nobody tells you about staying safe in this world. The danger doesn't announce itself with a weapon or a threat. It arrives with a smile, a familiar face, and a situation that feels just slightly off. And that slight feeling, that's your survival instinct trying to save your life. Let me take you back to St. Petersburg, Florida, in the year 2017. There's a woman living there who has always been a homebody, someone who found comfort in routine and safety in familiar surroundings. She worked a regular job, kept to herself mostly, and when she ventured out, it was usually just the 4 miles to the nearest Walmart. Her world was small, controlled, and safe, or so she thought. This is where our first critical lesson begins, because what happened to her started with something we all experience: social pressure from people we trust. Her coworker Jenna, about 10 years younger, had been persistently asking her to go out for weeks, not just once or twice, but relentlessly. Another coworker named Mira joined in on the requests. Now, think about this situation carefully. When someone from your workplace, someone you see every day and share professional space with, repeatedly asks you to join them socially, what goes through your mind? You think about being polite. You think about workplace dynamics. You think about not wanting to seem antisocial or stuck up. What you don't think about is danger. Because why would you? These are people you know, people you trust on some level, simply because you share a professional environment with them. After weeks of this social pressure, she finally gave in. She agreed to go out the following weekend, and this is where the first red flag appeared, though it seemed innocent at the time. Jenna came to her apartment and wanted to leave her car there, insisting that her coworker drive instead. Think about what this means from a manipulation standpoint. By leaving her car behind, Jenna ensured that she had a reason to return to her coworker's home later. She also ensured that her coworker would be the one in the driver's seat, the one responsible for navigation in an unfamiliar area, the one who would be most vulnerable if something went wrong. They picked up Mira and headed to a busy club. Once inside, they found a spot and ordered drinks. Everything seemed normal, the kind of night out that happens in cities across the world every weekend. But then Jenna said something that should have been another warning sign. She saw someone she knew and asked Mira to come with her, leaving her coworker alone just minutes after convincing her to come out. Think about the psychology of this moment. Why beg someone to join you for weeks, finally get them to agree, and then abandon them almost immediately? When Jenna and Mira returned, they were smiling and brought drinks with them. Jenna announced that her friend had bought them around. Here's where we need to understand something crucial about how predators operate in social settings. They don't hand you a drink and tell you they've drugged it. They use trusted intermediaries, people you know, people who hand you that glass with a smile. The woman trusted Jenna because she was her coworker, so she took the drink just as they did theirs. Jenna's friend apparently bought them 2 rounds each, and it wasn't long after the 3rd drink that something felt terribly wrong. Now, let's pause here and talk about what drugging actually feels like, because this is information that could save your life or someone else's. The woman described it not as the room spinning, which is what normal intoxication might feel like, but as a wave of thick, unsettling dread washing over her. This is critical. When someone has been drugged with common date rape drugs, they often describe a specific kind of wrongness, a feeling that goes beyond being drunk. There's a disconnect between how much you've had to drink and how you feel. There's a fog that descends over your mind that feels chemical and foreign. And, most importantly, there's often a deep primal fear that kicks in, your body recognizing danger even when your conscious mind is struggling to process what's happening. She insisted they leave immediately. The next several hours became fragmented in her memory, which is another hallmark of these drugs. But the first clear memory she had was sitting outside Mira's apartment complex, still in the driver's seat of her car. She heard Jenna and Mira talking, and whatever they said triggered her fight or flight response so intensely that she didn't need to understand the actual words. Her gut knew she was in danger. This is perhaps the most important point in this entire story. Even when your conscious mind is literally chemically impaired, even when you can't think clearly or remember things properly, your survival instinct can still function. It can still send you signals, still push you to act, still try to save your life. She slammed the car into drive and sped away, driving all over St. Petersburg, unable to focus, completely scrambled mentally, just trying to figure out how to get home. Whatever had been put in her drink was powerful enough that, despite consuming only 3 club drinks, which are typically watered down, she was completely impaired. At one point, she stopped at a red light, and this is where the situation escalated from disturbing to absolutely terrifying. 2 figures appeared at her window. Then someone was pulling her car door open. Now, think about what this means. Her car doors locked automatically the second she put the vehicle in gear. This is a standard safety feature in modern cars, but somehow these 2 men were actively pulling the door open anyway. To this day, she has no idea how they managed to override that lock, but the sight of them trying to get into her car while she was drugged and alone snapped her out of the mental fog just enough for her to hit the gas and flee the intersection. After that moment of sheer terror, her memory vanishes again. The next thing she recalls is sitting in her car parked near a row of quiet homes, staring blankly at her phone, trying desperately to figure out how to operate it. Think about that. She was trying to use a device she used every day, something that should be automatic, but the drug had made her so paranoid and confused that this simple action felt impossible. She looked around, saw no one, convinced herself she was safe for the moment, reclined the seat, and fell into a deep, drug-induced sleep. She woke around 5 in the morning with the drug finally wearing off. She was able to use her phone, put on the GPS, and drove straight home, collapsing into bed immediately. When she woke again around 11, she had 20 missed calls, mostly from Jenna, but a few from a concerned friend. When she called Jenna back, Jenna was frantic, demanding to know where she went. The woman's response was direct. She told Jenna that her friend had spiked her drink and she wasn't sticking around to find out what was going to happen next. And then Jenna said something that confirmed everything, something so chilling in its casual admission that it revealed the entire plot. She said that the spiked drinks weren't meant for her. Read that again. The spiked drinks weren't meant for you. This one sentence told the whole story. Jenna and Mira had apparently plans to be drugged themselves, probably as part of some scheme with these men, but somehow the drinks got mixed up or the plan changed. Either way, this casual admission confirmed that Jenna was not only aware of the drugging, but involved in planning it. But the story doesn't end there. Before Jenna came to pick up her vehicle, the woman remembered those 2 men trying to open her car door. She went outside to check, and there it was. The plastic casing of her driver's side door handle was completely missing. Whoever had been holding on to that handle when she sped away must have ripped it right off. The physical damage confirmed that the terror she felt wasn't a delusion or a drug-induced hallucination. Someone had actually tried to get into her car while she was drugged, driving alone and completely vulnerable.
Now I want to shift to a completely different setting, but one that illustrates the same core principle. Your instincts will try to warn you, but only if you're paying attention. This story takes place in a lively coastal town, small enough that everyone knows the main attractions, popular among tourists during summer but quiet during other seasons. The main draw is a beach that stretches several kilometers down to sand dunes that are perfect for scenic walks. These dunes are easy to get lost in, but at the same time easy to make your way out of, because if you walk a kilometer in any direction, you'll be back on the beach or on a path leading to the car park. During the day, families with young children take strolls there, people walk their dogs, and the dunes are known to be completely safe. This detail is important because it establishes a false sense of security. When a place is known to be safe during daylight hours, we often assume it remains safe at other times, or we don't think about the ways that safety can change when circumstances shift. This story involves a local scout group divided into 4 age groups, meeting every Thursday from 7 to 9 in the evening. On this particular night, it was the scouts' first meeting back after summer break, and tradition dictated that they meet at the car park and walk to the sand dunes. The older scouts would hike up the biggest dune, known as the Baldy Man, and help the newer 12-year-old scouts reach the top as an initiation ritual. While the scouts set off, the older venture group stayed behind to practice first aid for about 45 minutes. When they finished, they decided they still had time to go to the dunes. The quicker walkers reached the dunes first, but the tide was fully in, preventing them from walking on the beach to reach the Baldy Man, so they walked through the other hills instead. 4 of them set off toward where the scouts had gathered at the top of the Baldy Man. The others stayed behind at various checkpoints so the 4 heading to the scouts could find their way back. These 4 teenagers took off into the near pitch-black dunes, tripping and falling, going up and down hills, scraping their legs on pointed grass and occasional brambles. The moon illuminated the silhouette of the scouts in the distance, and they realized they were farther away than they thought. They stopped to rest on a ridge and looked back to see 2 other ventures looking toward them. They waved, and the wave was returned. One of them was about to continue when another member shushed everyone. He looked mildly concerned at first, but seemed to shrug it off. When questioned about why he shushed them, he said he thought he heard something rustling in the bushes. They put it down to the wind, although it was a very still night. This is your first warning sign in this story. When someone hears something unusual in an environment where there shouldn't be unusual sounds, especially on a still night when wind can't be blamed, that's your instinct trying to alert you to a presence you haven't consciously registered yet. After another 10 minutes, they reached the scouts, said hello, welcomed the new members, and decided they had to head back since it was now basically pitch black and they had no torch. They tumbled down the big hill and began making their way back to where they'd seen the other ventures on the ridge. When they finally made it up to them, they could immediately sense something was wrong. Even without a torch, they could see a look of panic on one person's face and another visibly shaking beside him. The question came immediately, "What's wrong?" And the response was chilling. One of them looked directly at the group and asked if any of them had been walking around alone down in a clearing where people might come to have a drink or smoke. The answer was no, they'd all been together the whole time. And that's when the realization hit everyone simultaneously. They could nearly feel each other's blood run cold. The other ventures on the ridge explained what they'd seen. A man with his hood up, dressed in all black, circling the clearing and obviously avoiding them. They'd thought it was one of their group at first, but the behavior was too out of character. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. When they'd waved at their friends from the other ridge earlier, they hadn't seen this man yet. But the minute their friends moved off that ridge, they saw what they assumed was the same man standing exactly where their friends had just stood, looking in their direction. He was following them, tracking their movement, positioning himself where they had been, watching where they went. This realization meant that the rustling in the bushes that one of them had heard earlier wasn't the wind. It was this man moving around, stalking them through the dunes. They were being followed, and they hadn't realized it until they'd already ventured deep into an isolated area in the pitch dark. There's safety in numbers, so the 6 of them made their way down to the clearing where the man had been spotted. One detail made this exponentially more frightening. He didn't even have a torch. Think about what that means. He was navigating these dunes in complete darkness, following a group of teenagers without any light source. That suggests either intimate familiarity with the terrain or a level of predatory focus that overrode the need for practical navigation tools. 2 of them rushed toward the scouts to warn their leaders about the situation while the other 4 stayed back and kept watch in the clearing. The 2 came back quickly after delivering the warning. It was oddly quiet now. They were terrified that this man dressed in all black, without a torch, circling and stalking them alone in the pitch-black dunes was going to jump out and attack. They hurried back to the car park, finding the last 3 ventures and their leader on the way back and notifying them of the situation. They were nearly out of the dunes when one of the younger scouts let out a scream, prompting all the others to run. The two leading the group rushed to the child first. The poor kid was in tears, and when asked what happened, he pointed to the left. There he was, the same man, standing on a ridge, just looking at them. And then someone noticed he had a knife in his hand. The Ventures carried the slower children back to the car park, which they assumed was safe. None of them ever saw the man's face, and none of them wanted to find out who it was.
Our third story brings us to perhaps the most common and insidious form of danger, the regular customer, the familiar face, the person who seems harmless because you see them all the time. This happened to a 22-year-old woman working as a bartender at a small dive bar just a few blocks from her apartment. It wasn't a fancy place, just locals coming for late-night drinks or to watch whatever games were on. She recognized regulars quickly, mostly older guys, and after her shifts, she usually walked home because it was so close, and sometimes she'd have a couple of shots with customers near closing time, making driving unwise. The walk only took about 7 minutes, and she'd done it so many times that she never really felt scared. But there was one regular who always made her uncomfortable. His name was Jared, known from his credit card. He looked to be in his late 30s, had thinning hair, and always wore the same brown jacket regardless of the weather. He never came in with friends. He would sit at the bar alone and try to talk to her the entire time, showing no interest in whatever sports games were on. He asked personal questions sometimes, and she always kept her answers short, staying polite because that was part of the job, but never encouraging him. One Friday night, he came in around 10, nursed one beer for almost an hour and just watched her while she worked, not staring intensely the entire time, but shooting constant glances that he'd break when she noticed. Almost every time she walked past, he tried to start a conversation. Near the end of his drink, he asked if she wanted to hang out sometime outside of work. She told him she wasn't interested and that she liked to keep her work and personal life separate. His face changed right away. He forced a smile, threw some cash on the bar, said, "Yeah, whatever," and left without tipping, which he'd never done before. She felt relieved he was gone, but also uneasy about how fast his mood had shifted. This rapid mood change is a critical warning sign that someone doesn't handle rejection well, that they feel entitled to something from you, and that their friendly demeanor is conditional on getting what they want. Her shift ended at midnight. She counted her tips, grabbed her hoodie, and headed out. The street was quiet like usual. She just turned onto the next block when she heard someone say her name. Her stomach dropped immediately. She turned and saw Jared standing near a lamppost. She hadn't even heard him walk up. He gave a small wave and started walking toward her. She stopped but kept some distance. He apologized for storming out earlier, said he just gets nervous. She told him it was fine, but that she really needed to get home. He nodded and said he just wanted to ask one more time if he could get her Instagram or Snapchat or something, promising he wouldn't bother her. She told him she didn't use social media. He stared at her for a second, then smiled in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable. He said that was weird because he'd seen her on Instagram at the bar before. Her heart started pounding because now he was directly confronting her with information he shouldn't have, revealing that he'd been paying much closer attention than she realized, possibly even looking her up online, watching what she posted. She just said, "Please leave me alone," because at this point he'd escalated things beyond comfort. He kept smiling and said, "Okay, have a good night." She turned and started walking again, trying to stay calm. After a few seconds, she thought she heard footsteps behind her. At first, she told herself she was being paranoid, but when she glanced back, she saw him walking in the same direction, about half a block behind her. She sped up a little. He sped up too. She slowed down. He slowed down. It felt like a sick game, like he was some character in a video game programmed to match her speed exactly. This is psychological torture, and it's intentional. He wanted her to know he was following her. He wanted her to feel afraid. He wanted her to understand that he had control over this situation. She kept walking toward her apartment building, hoping he would turn off somewhere, but he didn't. When she reached her building, she crossed the street instead of going straight to the door. She stopped and turned around. He stopped too. He just stood there, under a tree, mostly in shadow. She couldn't see his face clearly, but she could somehow tell he was smiling.
She yelled, asking why he was following her, saying she didn't want to have to call out for help. He didn't answer. He just stood there stiffly. She blurted out that her boyfriend lived with her and she was going inside to get him right now. That was a lie. She lived alone. She turned and hurried to the front door, punching in the code for the building. The door buzzed and unlocked for a few seconds. Right as she pulled it open, she heard fast footsteps behind her. She looked back and saw Jared running toward the building. She ran inside and let the door slam shut behind her, not waiting to see if it latched fully, just running up the stairs to the second floor. Her apartment was at the end of the hall. She could hear the main door downstairs push open aggressively, and then footsteps hitting the stairs hard and fast. He'd made it in. She fumbled with her keys at the door, almost dropping them. She could hear him getting closer, his shoes slamming against each step. She finally got the key in the lock and threw herself inside, slamming the door and locking it just as he reached the hallway. A second later, his whole body smashed into her door. The impact literally shook the entire door and wall. She screamed and backed away, grabbing her phone. He hit the door again, harder this time, like he was trying to break it down. Then another door opened in the hallway, and a man's voice yelled, asking what the hell he was doing. The banging stopped. There was a silence for a second, then footsteps quickly moving away. She looked through the peephole and saw her neighbor, an older guy who lived across from her, standing in the hall, looking confused and angry. Jared was already halfway down the stairs, not saying a word. Her neighbor knocked gently and asked if she was okay. She opened the door a crack, shaking and crying, and told him everything while he stayed in the hallway with her. He said he'd heard the banging and thought someone was trying to break in. She called the police, and they came that night, taking everything very seriously. She gave him Jared's name from the credit card at the bar, and the building owner pulled the camera footage showing him running in after her. Her boss provided the bar footage too. The next day, an officer called and told her they'd identified him as Jared Perez, and the detectives were sending the case to the prosecutor. It would be treated as stalking and unlawful entry because he chased her into the building and tried to force her apartment door open. She went to the courthouse the next day and filed for a restraining order, telling a judge everything that happened. They looked at the police report and security video, approving a temporary restraining order right away. Police served him with it soon after, and she was told the prosecutor was moving forward with charges related to him trying to break into her apartment.
Now let's bring all of this together and talk about what these three stories actually teach us about survival, about instinct, and about the mistakes we make that put us in danger. Because here's the truth that nobody wants to hear. In every single one of these situations, there were warning signs. There were moments when something felt wrong, when the situation didn't quite add up, when instinct tried to send a message. And in some cases, those warnings were ignored until it was almost too late. In the first story, the warning signs started early. A coworker being unusually persistent about getting someone to go out, wanting to leave her car behind and have someone else drive, abandoning that person almost immediately after arrival, bringing drinks from a friend instead of ordering directly from the bar. Each of these, in isolation, might seem innocent or explainable, but together they form a pattern, and our instincts are designed to recognize patterns even when our conscious mind wants to explain them away. The woman in that story survived because when her fight-or-flight response kicked in, even though she was chemically impaired, even though she couldn't think clearly, she listened to it. She didn't try to rationalize what Jenna and Mira were saying. She didn't give them the benefit of the doubt. She acted on pure instinct and got herself out of that situation. And when those men tried to get into her car, that same instinct gave her just enough clarity to hit the gas and escape. In the second story, the teenagers had multiple warnings. The rustling in the bushes on a still night, the figure dressed in all black with no torch, behavior that made no practical sense unless that person had predatory intent. The fact that he positioned himself exactly where they had been standing, tracking their movement. But here's what saved them. They talked to each other. They shared information. They didn't dismiss what they'd seen or heard because they were worried about overreacting. And when they realized they were being followed, they stuck together, moved as a group, and got themselves to safety. In the third story, the bartender knew Jared made her uncomfortable, but she continued engaging with him because that was part of her job, because being polite felt mandatory, because rejecting someone directly seemed rude or dramatic.
Even when he asked her out and she declined, even when his mood shifted dramatically, even when he showed up on her route home, she tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. It wasn't until he was literally chasing her into her building that the full danger became undeniable. So, what do we learn from all of this? First, your instincts are not paranoia. That feeling of wrongness, that sense that something doesn't add up, that uncomfortable sensation when someone's behavior doesn't quite match the situation, those are not random emotions. They're your subconscious mind processing hundreds of tiny details and sending you a warning. The problem is that we've been socialized, especially women, to ignore those warnings because acting on them might seem rude or dramatic or paranoid. Second, predators rely on social norms and your desire to be polite. They know that you don't want to make a scene. They know that you'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They know that you'll explain away warning signs because accusing someone of having bad intentions feels like a terrible thing to do. This is why the bartender kept engaging with Jared even though he made her uncomfortable. This is why the woman got in the car with Jenna despite multiple red flags. This is why the teenagers initially dismissed the rustling in the bushes as wind. Third, isolation is a weapon. Notice how in every single one of these stories, the danger escalated when people were separated or alone. Jenna made sure her coworker was driving, made sure they went to an unfamiliar location, then left her alone before the drinks arrived. The man in the dunes stalked teenagers who had separated from the larger group. Jared waited until the bartender was walking home alone late at night. Predators understand that isolation removes witnesses, removes help, and makes you more vulnerable. Fourth, and this is perhaps most important, you do not owe anyone your safety in exchange for their comfort. You don't owe a coworker your presence at a social event. You don't owe a customer continued polite conversation after hours. You don't owe anyone an explanation for why you feel uncomfortable. If something feels wrong, you are allowed to leave. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to make a scene. You are allowed to call for help. You are allowed to prioritize your safety over someone else's feelings every single time. The woman who was drugged survived because she acted on her instinct to flee even when her mind was scrambled. The teenagers survived because they communicated, stayed together, and took the threat seriously. The bartender survived because her neighbor intervened and because she involved law enforcement immediately. But in each case, the situation could have been avoided entirely if those early warning signs had been treated as the serious threats they actually were. Your gut feelings are not random. They're the product of millions of years of evolution, of countless generations learning to recognize danger, developing the ability to sense when something is wrong even before conscious thought can articulate why. That uncomfortable sensation when someone stands too close, when someone asks too many personal questions, when someone's reaction to rejection seems disproportionate, when a situation doesn't quite make sense, that's not paranoia. That's your survival instinct trying to save your life. The question isn't whether your instincts are right. The question is whether you're going to listen to them. Because in the end, being wrong about someone having bad intentions costs you nothing more than a potentially awkward moment. But being right about someone having good intentions when they actually mean you harm, that can cost you everything.